Here are some reasons to believe in Jesus Christ. Biblical archaeology, such as the Ipuwer papyrus, that records many of the plagues of Egypt that the Bible talks about, such as the Nile being blood, all the green things eaten, and so forth. There have also been many other findings of great importance, like inscriptions with Moses on them in Proto-Hebrew, and many biblical names found on rocks and stuff like that. But this is really important to Ipuwer papyrus because it proves that God did something. And here's a long inscription that thoroughly describes the events recorded in Genesis about Joseph and Pharaoh and the 7 years of famine. And it is slightly altered because it's from the Egyptian point of view, but it does show that it happened. It's external witness to the authenticity of the Bible stories and also of Joseph's prophecy that's being right. And this is called the famine stela, and you can look it up in Wikipedia. And then there's fulfilled prophecy. And here is a post-exile prophet in Israel saying that God's going to gather Israel. And, well, they had went back at that time. They had went back. But he's talking about later, far in the future. Zechariah talks a lot about it in that book. Chapter 10 talks about too. And this is a recently fulfilled prophecy. And there's also this prophecy in Isaiah that's obviously talking about a time in the far distance, and says in that day, and that always refers to far distant time when God will restore Israel and things like that. And the Bible's very clear that it would happen. And in the 1940s, it happened. Israel became a country again. Who would have thought after, well over 1,000 years of not being a country, that it would become a country? I would also like to point out that this is just a sampling, but there is a lot of prophecies that have been fulfilled and that are recorded in history as that happened just like the Bible described it, and the Bible was written before that had happened. So that there's a lot of instances like that are clearly fulfilled prophecy, but this is just one of them. And a lot of people scoff at miracles happening nowadays, but there's a lot of people saying that they have happened. And of course there's fakes. There's always fakes, but there's some things that are undeniable when a doctor's standing there and things happen, like a withered limb heals and stuff like that because of prayer. That's undeniable. If you want to see documentation of miracles happening, there's a book called Miracles Today by Keener, and it documents them, like a lot of medical records and stuff, saying how people got healed. And this one's interesting too, because there's out-of-body experiences, like they call them near-death experiences and stuff like that, where people have many, many times, they've been started to track this and everything, but people will say, I looked down and saw my body, or things like this where their body is not linked to their mind anymore, and it's not just faking it or thinking that's happening, but they're actually seeing stuff, and they can accurately recount to them what they did, procedures to them and stuff like that. So that's pretty good evidence for something that can't evolve. There's no way for spiritual things to evolve. And so if you have a spirit, it's because you were created. And the more you look into it, there's a lot of documentation actually of spiritual possession. People talking with voices that they shouldn't be able to have and things like that. That's demon possession. And when we see that spiritual wickedness, we realize that if there's evil, there must be good too. So it points to God as well. Something else I'd like to point out is that history confirms the Bible too. A lot of people think there's historical contradictions in the Bible, but it's typically because of their ignorance. Many times, archaeological finds have been found that show that the historians didn't know what they were talking about and that the Bible was right all along. That's happened many times. You would think at some point people would just believe the Bible. But many things that have been denied as being completely illogical and foolish, like miracles and various other things like that are recorded in the Bible, have actually been confirmed by oral histories or written histories. Modern revisionist history doesn't always match what you find in ancient manuscripts. And a good book I'd recommend on this topic is Echoes from Ararat by Le Guinguy. But basically, there's history from many cultures around the world. Most cultures around the world of ancient cultures have it. And flood legends, like flood the whole earth, and like you'll notice a lot of different elements straight from the Bible because the Bible's accurate record of history. And you'll see these elements coming back over and over again, like the doves that Noah sends out, the how many people on the boat, and you know, and all these elements, the twig that they bring back, and all these things, you'll see them in these different histories. And they call them flood myths when you look up in Wikipedia. But another one that is slightly less common, but is recorded in many, many histories too, is a Tower of Babel-like legend. And for instance, let's just list off a few cultures that had that. And so the Sumerians had that, which they were around Israel, and then the Creek Indians in North America, Toltec Indians in Central America, Totoham in like New Mexico, and Polynesians in the Pacific. And that's just a few of them. And once again, there's the common theme. It's they build a tower, or like in some of the more far-fetched ones is like trees, but like just for instance, the Creek Indian one, they build a mound and they start stacking rocks up on it. And these kind of things, the people all working together to build a tower, and the God character wanting to basically make the work not happen. And so there's various ways that happens in the stories, but it all ends up with basically every one of those stories also is their explanation for how the languages were divided. And it's interesting how so many cultures, like with flood legends too, but how so many cultures across the world would have that same idea of how the languages were divided. And it makes sense that if you see it all over the world, then it's probably true, right? It was the history that people recorded. And there are even Garden of Eden accounts and stuff like that. And, you know, these stories are before Christian influence. Like, these are their traditional stories that they had before Christianity. So it's not like Christian influence into their stories. And they still have the traditional gods and everything in these stories. So it's obviously not a Christian story, like as if it's Christian influence or something. Like a lot of these are found on inscriptions that were way before Christ even lived. So, yeah. And fulfilled prophecy is one of the most powerful links between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and proving that the Bible is true and thus Jesus is true. That's the best way to prove that Jesus is true, is that the Bible is true. But this one is more about just God's existence in general and Almighty Creator. So basically, in essence, the argument is that you find something that's super complex, like a watch, and what's the assumption when you see that? Do you look at it and say, wow, a big explosion or implosion or whatever made this? Not it came from absolutely nothing? Or would the assumption be somebody made this who was really smart and had a lot of skill, and it didn't come from nothing? It was made from materials. And that would be the logical answer, would be yes, it was made by somebody. And so that's the same argument for everything we see around us. The beauty, the complexity, the closer you look at it, the more complex it is. And you realize it couldn't have been a mistake or by chance this happened. There's no way. And there's one example I've seen before, like a bombardier beetle. A scientist was explaining how a bombardier beetle, it can't have just part of the mechanism working, not the other, because it would just explode or like burn up. It has to have everything in place at the same time. And there's so many things like that. We couldn't live with just half our organs, of our vital organs. That doesn't work. And there's so many reasons why it can't be a mistake. And really, evolution's answer of everything came from nothing and nothing exploded and made everything really doesn't make sense. And another book I'd recommend on basically why the fundamental laws of nature don't agree with the theory of evolution, I'd highly recommend a book called Truth Be Told. And it's very good on showing how the laws of nature show that evolution cannot be true. Thanks for watching.